spare marriage. Harry continues by explaining that his father announced that he'd decided to marry and that he'd asked the Queen's permission and it had been granted. Notwithstanding the fact that both him and William didn't want them to get married, he explained that he wished him well and recognised that he was finally going to be with the woman that he loved. He explained that whatever bitterness or sorrow he felt over the closing of another loop in Mummy's story, yep, Diana gets mentioned again, we understood that it was beside the point. He explained that he had a degree of sympathy for his father and Camilla. He explained that there was controversy over the nature of the ceremony. It would have to be a civil ceremony because he couldn't marry a divorcee in the church. And this set off a debate about the relevant locations, and it was decided that it would take place at Windsor Guildhall. But then the Pope died, and it turned out that they didn't want to get married on the same day that the Pope was being laid to rest. Apparently bad karma, according to Harry. And that the wedding kept getting delayed and the plans for it kept getting changed. And again, this is where he almost experiences this sort of slightly dopey thinking, where he said that although he felt sorry for them, he couldn't help but think that there was some force in the universe, Mummy, ? Blocking rather than blessing their union. I mean, seriously, thinking that, oh yes, just because the wedding plans were taking longer to come to fruition and there were various obstacles in the way, that somehow that there was this mystical force, that it was his mother. This again demonstrates his susceptibility to somebody like Harry's wife that would come along and feed these ideas of it being the universe and mystical powers that are causing these things to happen or not to happen. You can see how quite readily he would be convinced by somebody waving a crystal in the air and burning something to create an odour that would somehow have an influence upon his life. It all is demonstrative of his susceptibility to all of this. He explains that the wedding finally took place, that the Queen didn't attend, and he found it almost cathartic. And he said that he snuck several long peeks at the groom and the bride, and each time I thought for them, good for you. But he also thought goodbye, because he thought that without question it would take his father away from him, and that he would see less of his father, and it left him with mixed feelings. He said he didn't want to relish losing a second parent, but he also saw how happy his father was, and it was hard to deny the fact that it was Camilla that made him that way. And he said, I remember thinking about how happy they are, and they're really happy. Of course, he doesn't really understand what they are and that the happiness is manufactured, but his parting thought was he'd like everybody to be happy. Now, around this time, he also explains that he went off with William to train with a special boat service. It wasn't official training, it was just a bit of larking around, and the exercises were kept hidden from the press. The military preferred it that way, and so did the royals. And then there were exercises at a killing house in Herefordshire, and he explains that it was Mummy, yes, again she gets mentioned, who took William and him on his first military exercise. But on this day, it was much more, it was different to the involvement then, and it took place at Poole Harbour. And he explained that he fell and injured his knee, and his knee was gushing blood. Paramedics were there, and therefore it would have to postpone his entry into the army as a consequence of this injury that he had suffered. Oh no! Harry has knacked his knee, and apparently everybody was told that he injured his knee playing rugby, and that was what was printed, and he felt rather pleased with that, because as a consequence of this, he had managed to spin a yarn to the press. However, they started pushing a story that he was afraid to go into the army and that he was using a fake knee injury as a way of stalling going in, and that they were suggesting that he was a coward, which of course got under his skin. And again, it's understandable that that was the case. It's interesting as well how a lot of this, it's a bit strange how it's all pieced together. The common theme is of, I hate the press, and they print lies about me, and I'm going to mention my mum. And I think it would have been interesting, actually, if Harry had decided that he was just going to write a book about his mother. Because the way that all this pans out, it sort of leaps around. 1 minute it's attempting to be serious, then the next minute it's trying to be jokey. In other respects, what he tells us isn't particularly interesting. And then he brings up his mother again. And I think if he had done a book that was specifically about his mother, I think more people would think, right, okay, he could almost use that as a catharsis. Because what it causes is, as he tries to talk about his life, each time he mentions about his mother, because as you know, earlier on he had the section talking about how she was killed and the funeral, fair enough, that was a huge event in his life, talk about it. And also perhaps talk about the impact it's had upon him. But the problem is that the way that it's been written, and it's clear that the ghostwriter didn't appreciate this, is that it basically makes him seem like he can't get rid of his mother out of his head. And it's sort of, I'm talking about this particular subject, and then bang, he's talking about his mother. And now I'm talking about something different, and bang, I'm talking about my mother again. And the way that the ghostwriter has done this is it makes it seem almost like he thinks of her at moments where you wouldn't do so. And it makes him seem perhaps more damaged than he actually is. I think that if he sat down and decided to write about what had happened to his mother, how he saw it, how it affected him, how on many occasions he had these reminders of her, how he's tried to deal with it in terms of therapy, what he believes has happened to her, his thoughts about the information surrounding it all, the involvement of the royal family, and just basically called it something along the lines of my relationship with my mother. So everybody knew that it was about Diana. I think that would have come across better. Here, it just makes him look like he's got this weird obsession with her, because it's almost like, I'm talking about baked beans, mummy, or, I was watching a football match, mummy. Maybe that's how it does pop up for him, and that's the extent by which it affects him. But to my mind, it looks rather peculiar, and it seems like that is the backdrop to everything, and then you get all of these other things sort of thrown in as a weird kind of mixture of his life. We're now going to move on to the fact that along came Kate Middleton, and we'll learn what he thought about her when she first came along. Join me there.